Members, and welcome back to this week's Table Talk as we continue the discussion on family dynamics. And it's a very important one as it affects us all. And our family dynamics as children has affected how we grow up and who we grow up to be. And in turn, we'll see in this discussion how it affects our relationship with our spouses. And what I want to let you guys know ahead of time is the reference to the Bible passage that led to this discussion. It is in Genesis 2:24 through 25. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. And the man and his wife were both naked and were not ashamed. So, we thank you for joining us on this journey. Please continue to enjoy watching the rest of this video.
The last part, how we talked about the male side of things, it's always fun to get a mixed side of things, especially almost as a bridge before we get to the female side of things. Family dynamics, obviously, is what we're talking about. So, no. What?
I knew he was going to do something, that's why I was looking at you. I was trying to ignore him.
Continuing on, though, I'm sorry. So you have notes.
Yes, I do.
You literally brought it to
Wholly unprepared.
Could we use such a word?
Thank you.
Let's see.
What's your first scribble?
My first scribble? Well, no. Something I thought of with in Genesis was that the Bible says that they were naked. And I feel like that's not necessarily just in the physical clothing wise, but they didn't necessarily have any secrets to hide from each other because there was no sin to hide secrets and all that brain thing that we have going on where we feel like we have to hide an inner self from other people. So I feel like we need to make sure that we are not just that we are fully just naked with our spouse. And I know that sounds weird.
Vulnerable.
Yes. Yeah. Vulnerable. I think it's important for us to be like that emotionally, spiritually, and mentally.
It's freaking hard.
Yeah. Especially I feel like after growing up, I know for you guys had known each other for years before you guys got married. And we at least knew each other for 4 years before we started dating.
We're still not. We're still meeting. It's only been almost 6 months.
But actually, though, it's still you still after even that long. I'm sure you guys are still understanding and revealing things about each other that come with different experiences and different life steps. So
and a lot of different of how you grow up and how you and your family treated each other versus how you and your siblings treated each other, and then how you treat other people. Because you're always going to treat people in your house differently than you treat a waiter. And both are absolutely important, and both tell you a lot about the person that you're getting to know when you're dating. But it's not always the full picture. You need both, and you need a lot of behind the scenes. Even though we dated 5 years before we moved in together, and we had our later teenage years together, we still had all those early teenage years and those childhoods that formed a lot about how we handle situations, how we approach stress, how we vent stress, stuff like that. And then when we moved in together, he was like, whoa, wait, this is the same human? And that is, it's scary, but it's also kind of cool. Because you learn so much more about that person when those walls are down, when you're fully naked. And even, we've been married almost 3 years, we're still learning stuff about how each other's brains work, how we come to some sort of conclusion, how we just approach things, and the little things, the instincts that we ourselves are uncovering. And we're going, okay, I react to this. Why do I react to it that way? So I know how to help my spouse help me.
Which is only something that's very new to our relationship. Because me personally, I have always sought out why I feel certain ways or why I react certain ways, but that wasn't something for her. It was, and she dealt with it. And that's just how it was. But for me, it was I was so mad at the fact that I was mad that I wanted to know why I was mad. Like, it's very mixed, but it got down to the fact that in high school, if something happened, I could tell you exactly how I'd react in that situation. And if that situation did arise, that is exactly how I'd react because I sought to understand myself. And it's changed a lot since then, and it becomes more and more difficult, especially when you add the element of someone else. So there's situations where I just don't know anymore, because in that time period or situation, something may happen, and I will get lost in both trying to remember who I'm dealing with and understanding how I'm going to react. And the initial reaction stays the same, but how I then continue on because of who I'm dealing with. And I mean, you could also change that into friendships and stuff like that too. But it changes a lot on the reaction, like the true reaction. But going into the dynamic of it, it's just going background specifically. There's many things with my childhood that created how I react and why I do things, or why I believe certain ways. And if you're not able in a sense of a relationship able to be naked with each other and be completely like just no bores, no walls, no nothing, just completely open, then it's incredibly difficult to understand each other. And I think a lot of misconceptions with a family, because like you look in on a family like, man, they're messed up. Or you look in on a family that's exactly who I want to be, but you're not looking at that family. You are looking at the extension of multiple families in one household. Because they react because of how their parents reacted, and their parents treated them in their own household because of how their parents reacted. And it's a generational mold of a person. You look at someone and it's because of how their parents treated them, how their friends treated them, but there's so much more to that. And there's so much more depth to that feeling. And that's why so many people, they're like, why did these people turn out so different? Even though their stories are almost exactly the same, and this because they're families, even though they did, even if they got turn for turn exactly the same, the feeling and the emotion behind words and actions are very different depending on who it's coming from. And from a family perspective, if you look at your kid and you're like, no, they're going to stop. They're not going to be mad. I mean, they might be mad because they may want to do. But if some stranger came up and said, no, you're going to run. You're going to be like, or fight back. Like, the reaction is different depending on the family or the relationship.
Yeah, I mean, even going back to what we were saying about being open, vulnerable with your spouse, like even talking about backgrounds, there are still things that, like, I'm learning about you, she's learning about me, because we are who we are at our core when we're by ourselves. When you marry someone, when you move in with that person, that's when you start learning who they really are, because they're no longer by themselves. They're no longer in their own world. Their own world now has been merged with someone else's. So like how you were saying, like, is this the same person? It's true. Like, they are never going to be the same person they are in public. I am never going to be truly, quote unquote, who I am in front of y'all, because this is me being me, but also in a social context.
Yes.
How I am at home is vastly different based on how I act, how I will like lounge around, how I would do whatever, because it's my own personal space. She only learned that after we moved in together, after we became that unit. She didn't know that beforehand because there was no way to know that beforehand. You can't explain someone like, oh yeah, so I watch TV like this, and this. By the way, I bite my nails, blah, blah. You may not necessarily do that in a social context, but that's stuff you do in private. And privacy is something that we've always held very dear, especially if you come from an interesting background, privacy was like your getaway. That was your vacation. That was how you escaped from whatever issues.
And sometimes you have none.
Right. So, however that may come to fruition in how you act, suddenly becomes widely known to one person.
Yeah.
And then you continually change as we get older and how we grow. You grow together, but you also grow individually. So aspects of yourself that are changing also become news to that person. Like you can be married for 40 years, and even though you grow together, you're reacting differently than how you used to. Why? There could be outside sources, there could be work environments, blah blah, that change and morph how you act and react to things. That wasn't because of your relationship. That wasn't because of your spouse or whatever. So the biggest thing for families is, again, going back, that aspect of vulnerability, that aspect of feeling okay to be weak, which is also important in faith.
Yeah.
To be able to rely on God fully. Can you hit that real quick?
No problem. It's angry.
Is it over?
Hi.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it looks like.
There might be a weird skip with that.
That's okay.
As far as our faith is concerned, with how much God loves us, He just wants us to be vulnerable with Him. He wants us to be able to come to Him for everything, to feel that comfort that we do when we're by ourselves. And as well as for marriage, the important thing is to be able to be united with that person, to be able to husband come to their wife and wife to be able to come to their husband in openness and in love and in that comfortability that's there. Because it doesn't matter how you look at it. If a husband doesn't feel comfortable with his wife, that trust isn't there. And if a wife isn't comfortable with her husband, that trust isn't there. There will always be a sense of brokenness because you can't be one with that person if you can't be yourself with that person. You can't be open with that person.
So I've kind of a twofold question, especially because you guys have a very different kind of relationship than we do, or at least length of time and just kind of different dynamics. Because you're different people, except we are not. Is there a moment that you guys can pinpoint of when you first really, really became vulnerable with each other, as well as like the first time you were really vulnerable spiritually, and kind of the similarities and the differences between those two?
Between the two,
being vulnerable with Jordan and being vulnerable with God.
Oh, okay, I see.
Because I think it's a similar scary idea.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So when before we started dating, we were best friends, very close, and she relied on me a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I made an effort to be there for her.
Mm-hmm.
There will be times where she'll be open up to me and be very vulnerable, I think. So she was vulnerable with me well before we got together. I think I became the most vulnerable with you right before we got together. Because a lot of stuff happened all at once for me. And even though some people might say I'm an open book, I still tend to keep things to myself. The way I open up to people is by, opening up. Especially when things are going on at that time. But I tend to kind of keep myself a little close just because of history, just with myself, with family, or whatever. Now the difference is, like you're asking for comparison of like how that felt versus how it felt to be vulnerable with God for the first time.
And what was like the first time you, like, if you're comfortable sharing, like you really, really felt vulnerable with God, like actually, like just, hands up in the air kind of thing?
I don't remember the story, but I remember what was happening. Basically, I just really broke down, just crying and just like praying out to God. It was like one of the first times that ever happened. And it really hasn't happened since. Like, I don't... In my mind, vulnerability is when I'm like at my weakest. And I'm at my weakness when I'm as close to a breaking point as I can get, or at that breaking point. Specifically one time, I'm sure there's multiple times, but where I was specifically vulnerable with God was when, again, I don't remember the event that led up to it, but I'm sure it had to do something with why am I here? Why didn't I die? Like at birth, whatever, why am I still functioning? Why did you put me here? What is my purpose?
Mm-hmm.
And I just really broke down hard. I was in the bathroom, like I was taking a shower, and I was just on the floor, just gut-wrenching crying.
Mm-hmm.
And then I felt peace from God. Like I felt that love. I felt that response to weakness. I felt that carrying up. And that I think was and I was easily middle school. I don't think it was earlier than that, and I don't think it was in high school. I'm pretty positive it was around the 7th grade time frame. But I just remember feeling that joy and like, wow, that was the first time I genuinely was just weak and was completely opened up, literally naked, with God and just not knowing what to do. But there were no walls up whatsoever. It was just me and God, and I was vulnerable, and I felt love.
Yeah, like he was saying, like we were both very vulnerable with each other beforehand. We did have the best friend beforehand. That way, not that way. We didn't plan on it, like getting together, but I'm sure he did. But
he's like, I made an effort to be there. She cute up here.
It's all part of the plan.
Not the only reason, I know. But yeah, we were that best friend before starting to date, so we didn't have those dating games of like we could put up front and just be somebody else or hide things. We already were vulnerable with each other and were able to feel comfortable talking with each other, so we didn't play those games and stuff. So I really can't think of a specific time, more like that time frame of just building our friendship before dating.
That section of like a year or months or whatever, just a period.
Yeah. And as far as vulnerability with God, I feel like same with you is that where I get so pushed to the point of I've just broken down, I just on my floor crying, like just help me God. But I feel like the first time, and like as he was talking, the image came to my mind was I was at a Jeremy Camp concert. And it was the first time that I felt free to raise my hands to and like actually felt his presence. And like I continually felt that like afterwards, but that was like the first and strongest point. And I feel like vulnerability is not just at our weakest point, or not at our weakest point, but we need to continually to be vulnerable with God.
Yeah.
Honestly, we have started implementing the good morning God.
Yeah, we did.
And good night God.
We did.
Because we are inviting him into our daily lives and making us aware of his presence. Even though growing up we know God's everywhere and he's with us, but when you actually acknowledge him in the room with you, it is that kind of vulnerability that, okay, I'm welcoming you in daily.
Yeah.
I like, you welcome God into your life when you've accepted that he died for your sins and everything, but I feel like that's important daily, and to be vulnerable is to accept that he is physically there with you, spiritually there with you. Obviously not necessarily physically there with you, but spiritually.
Yeah.
He's over here like giving fist bumps and stuff.
I know we're running short on time, but I also want you guys to answer that too.
That's the question.
That's what you asked the question.
No, that's okay. Okay, so fair warning, I might tear up because this was a very emotional point in life.
She teared up, it's fine.
Yeah, it's all good. I'm an emotional mess. It's fine. Even though we were friends before we started dating, and we were young, I mean, we were 15, we were both raised very Southern, which is very polite. I can hear my dog yelling out back. So we were raised very, very polite. There were things you do say and things you don't say, and there's a certain level of politeness that restricts honesty. And we talked a lot, we asked a lot of questions because we came from very different backgrounds. But we got to a certain point and didn't go much further emotionally for a while. And then after we moved in together, and I started doing hair, and I stopped doing karate, and I stopped working with horses, and I was all in on something for the first time in my life. When that started to go down, and I lost my best friend, and I lost my karate family, and we lost the friendship of our roommates, and I was switching jobs. There was one night it just became too freaking much, and I came home from work 2.5 hours after I was supposed to close, and I I put a cup of ramen noodles because it was the only thing we could afford to eat in the microwave, because I hadn't eaten all day, and I'd worked at that point, I guess 16.5 hours straight by myself. It was a Saturday, so it was busy, and I went to get the ramen noodles out of the microwave, and I burnt my fingers, and I burnt my hand really, really bad, and I just sat on the kitchen floor crying. And I think you were even asleep. And he came out of the bedroom, he's like, go get in the bath. And I was like, but I'm so hungry. He's like, I will bring you food, go get in the bath. And letting him take care of me is not something I am willing to do normal. And I went and I was going to get in the bath, and I came out to get a glass of water because I was crying so much. And he had food in the microwave. He was cleaning the cat's litter box. He's like, go get in the freaking tub. Just like, let me do this. And I was like, I don't have to do this alone. I'm the only one that's emotional. Yay. So, not long after that, I always have issues.
Try not to say it.
It's okay. I need a break, so I need to get through the second part. So not long after that, because I've always had issues letting anybody take care of me. Doesn't matter if it's parents, siblings, anybody. I'm very much, I can do this myself. I will do this myself. I don't need anybody else because I'm a small female. I'm very underestimated. And I'm like, no, I'm going to go pick up the 7 chairs. Who needs a strong boy to do it? You know, cleaning up the sanctuary, right?
That's why I picked up 8.
Also why I married him, because he could beat me.
Picked up 8 and 2 tables.
Yes. No, literally, like at 15, I'm lifting 10-foot surfboards over my head, and people are going, like, what? Mm-hmm. But that's always been the person I am. So I have issues with letting people take care of me. I have issues with trusting somebody to take care of me, and trusting that they will do as good a job or better. Mm-hmm. So not long after that, when I was really thinking about leaving my job, and I'd never quit a job before in my life. Like, the dojo was pre-planned, the horses, I literally, like, I was working to the point of exhaustion, and I wasn't waking up to my alarms. And she's like, you know what, you got too much on your plate, don't worry about it. I'll handle it. And I was like, okay. So I've never quit a job before. And the situation was so, it was wrecking me. It was wrecking our relationship. It was wrecking any friendship. And I remember coming home from a similar night. It wasn't as bad. And I was crying in the shower. And damn, I'm gonna start crying again. I started singing "You're a Good, Good Father." Broke me.
I think that was the same night I told you you're quitting that job.
That was the night I burnt my hand.
Yeah.
That was the night I burnt my hand. And I still held on for another month or 2 until they could get somebody else so it wasn't just one person working in that salon. But I started singing "You're a Good, Good Father." And I didn't know the words. But both of the situations are being naked and being willing to trust. That's freaking hard. But it also, when that trust is there, you allow God or your spouse to take care of you. It opens up an additional vulnerability. It's like, oh, what else have I been carrying by myself? Like, how else can I share my burdens so he can share his? And like we were talking about earlier, it's a companionship, it's a partnership. So that was really similar, and it was also in a very short period of time. Your turn.
Yeah. Mine was actually in the same time period. Whenever she had lost her friend, I had lost my entire friend group. Mm-hmm. And it was over a moral disagreement. Without going into any details, there was a situation that happened that I disagreed with, and as roommates, I brought it up. And they thought it wasn't my place, and it just so happened that the two roommates that we had were siblings of more people inside of the friend group, who then made me the bad guy because I said they had to move out. Over a period of time, it wasn't like it was an instant choice. I gave them 2 months to fix what they needed to fix, and they didn't. And I had to tell them to leave. And there was other mistakes that I did make, and I did fix them financially because we didn't know that we needed a 60-day heads up, so we had to pay double. Mm-hmm. And I paid half of it myself just as an apology. But they didn't take that as good enough. And I remember the final message that I sent to the person I was closest to in that group. And it was an apology because I thought he'd be the one to understand. And I had apologized to him. And I sent the message. And I just looked at Holly and I was like, I just lost all my friends. And it changed me a lot. I used to be, I still have some of the confidence I used to have. I've never had a stutter, and I stutter every now and then now. But that was definitely the most I've been vulnerable with her because I just broke down and I just cried. The most vulnerable I've been with God, though. Mine's more of a happy story, and it actually happened not too long ago.
Yeah, please tell a happy story.
Please.
I've been fighting off Niagara Falls for like 20 minutes.
Ready for this.
I was so confused with that. I was like,
it's the light, you're blinded.
I'm not going to go with the first time. I'm going to go with the most vulnerable time. And that was, I've always struggled with death and the understanding of, and with a logical brain and then trying to also be religious, it gets very, very bouncing back and forth between, yay, I'll be with God, but will I actually be myself? Because all evil will be gone and I am my evil, so what am I? And it goes into a weird cycle. But I just remember I just started having night terrors. I would wake up just in a sweat, and I knew exactly what it was from, and I almost tried to remember the dream, and I couldn't. But there'd be times, even at work, where, I work, and there's older guys that are there, and they just casually talk about death, and I would freeze, and I couldn't move, and I've, not to try to boast about myself, but there's not many things that I am scared of. I was the kind of kid that if I was scared of heights, I would climb up into a tree and stare at the ground until I wasn't scared anymore. And then I realized I wasn't scared of heights, I was scared of falling, so I kept falling until I wasn't scared of that. I was that kind of kid. But you can't really do that with death.
I'm gonna die so many times.
You either do it right or you do it wrong, and but it was something
I already know our kids are gonna get that trait.
It was something I was always scared of, and it terrified me. And it was something I wasn't used to. Mm-hmm. And I remember I was in the shower, and what was the name of the song? It's terrible. I'm trying to tell the story.
Which one? Her shower story.
Oh, I'll go the distance.
I'll go the distance.
I'll go the distance.
Yeah.
And
we can't sing it because, copyright.
There was just something about the song that spoke differently to me whenever I sang it that time, and it was, I knew where I was supposed to be, and that was the point of the song, is he didn't know where he belonged, and I realized I wasn't scared of death. I was scared of my place. Because if I were to die and there was nothing, I had no place, no matter where I was now. And I realized it didn't matter where I was going to be, it's where I am. And I am where I am until I'm supposed to be somewhere else. So worrying about death, even though it's still a worry, it's still a fear, it is not as much because it's not where my focus is supposed to lie. And it was one of those times where I in the shower, and we have a small shower, guys. We have a small shower, and I went to my knees and I just started crying, and I sang the song like 4 times before I felt my fear just fade as I was singing it.
In conclusion, showers are magical.
I mean, I had another thing with dishes. I was doing dishes and I sang the song over and over again.
Water is purifying.
But really.
Specifically tears, apparently.
It's a...
So, and again, we don't have that much time. So I guess kind of just to wrap up this part of it, something that's very important is between husband and wife and between us and God is that trust and vulnerability. The trust of safety. That trust of, hey, we are side by side. We are going through this life together. We are on equal ground with each other. I need to be able to be free to trust and to cry and bawl and to ugly cry in front of you. And know that no matter if I scream, if I frantically, whatever, that I'm safe with you. And that's also how we should feel with God, because that aspect of, it's very freeing to know that you can be crazy as all get out and be loved because of it. And be loved because you don't have to worry about, will this person still be there after I just ugly cry as all get out, or if I scream at the top of my lungs, or, if I need, tea after it because I hurt my voice. That person is going to, I'm not talking experience.
I don't know what you're talking about.
That person is going to be there to hold you and to love you and be there for you. And that's so important with a spouse. That's so important in family. Because I know I've done that with my grandma. And I know that my grandma's not going to just dump me. I can have that. I can have that that freedom to just be the worst me.
Yeah.
And feel that love.
Okay. Last thing I'll say is, before we got married, I promise it will be the last thing, but it is important. when we got married, we had been together so long and engaged for so long. It was I was like, okay, well, we're basically already married, but there is something about that concrete commitment that was so much more freeing than I had any idea it was going to be.
When the doors closed.
It was like, no, I signed up for this, and they signed up for this. After all the ugly crying and the screaming and everything, like, we'd been through a lot, and I thought it wasn't going to get any safer. And it did.
Because it's that realization of, one, you can exit at any point before you get married. You can still exit after that, but, without it being messy or whatever. But it's that realization of, wow, I married you and you married me. Like, you loved me this much to where you want to be with me for the rest of your life. And that's impactful on itself.
Yeah.
And that's so opposite from the jokes of, oh, it's ball and chain, this is terrible, wow, I really want to get out of this. But I feel like it's the same for us, where after marriage it was like, okay, yeah. Like, not much had really changed, but there was still that slight change in a good way. Yeah, it felt better.
So as a wrap, guys, being vulnerable, I think, is the core of any relationship. But as a family, being vulnerable gives the availability to tie into each other and be closer. With that also being said, keep an update. There's a few things that might be changing. We're going to solidify it with different streams and videos. We'll definitely keep you guys updated. But until then, Embers, don't forget to smolder.